Hey there, and welcome to That News You Care About, a weekly video game news show from the folks over at That Nerdy Site. Today is Tuesday, October 26th of 2021, and I am one of your hosts, Logan Wilkinson. Joining me this week is my Phoenix son, Trevor Starkey.
Hello.
How you doing, Trev?
Doing all right. We, I had a good little, 45 minutes talking about Bond because you finally saw No Time to Die before we started recording. So
absolutely,
it was nice.
Yeah, it was a good little chit chat. Always love talking about Bond. Can never do it enough. And kind of in a similar vein, we're having a low-key, lo-fi beats episode of News You Care About this week, where we are just diving into what we've been playing recently as we kind of get into the full swing of the fall season of games kind of release window here. Bit of a weird fall window for games, I suppose, but nonetheless, me and Trevor have each been playing a number of different things, and I thought it would be fun to kind of hop through what we've been playing, what we've been enjoying, what we liked and maybe haven't liked. Trevor, as the guest of honor here, you can start first. What have you been playing recently in the video game realm?
I mean, probably the most consistent thing I've been playing recently is Final Fantasy XIV.
I knew you were going to say it.
Yeah, I hopped back into that because I did try it a few years back, and kind of bounced off. I mean, I put a ton of time into it even the first time around, but I bounced off still pretty early on in A Realm Reborn.
Mm-hmm.
But I hopped back in. We actually did it as one of our Patreon early access episodes back in May. I hopped in with Cameron and kind of did the opening. We recorded my opening hour of coming up with my new character, figuring out what class I was going to be this time around. And I've been sticking with it. I just finished the post-patch content for Stormblood, so I've just started Shadowbringers, which is the fourth and so far final expansion for A Realm Reborn / Final Fantasy XIV. And then Endwalkers comes basically about a month from now. Late November is when that one's going to come out. So I've basically got a month to get through this last expansion and the kind of the post-patch stuff in the lead up to that. Shouldn't have a problem with that. Though I looked at my kind of clock on my PlayStation 5, and it's been 239 hours since May of Final Fantasy XIV.
Disgusting.
Yeah. Because it's been A Realm Reborn, which is quite a bit of time, and then the stuff leading up to Heavensward, and then finishing Heavensward, and then leading into Stormblood, and then now into Shadowbringers. So yeah, it has been lots and lots of Final Fantasy XIV, but I've been having a really good time with it. As somebody who was originally and initially intimidated by the MMO-ness of it, and I don't typically like playing with other people. The fact that I can hop in and play with other people and not really have to chat with them, which is fortunate because it's really tough to do the chatting on a PlayStation version of the game compared to the mouse and keyboard of a PC. But for the most part, in the role I'm playing as a DPS, as a black mage, I just kind of show up, do what I'm supposed to do, and do whatever damage I can against the bosses. Occasionally I need to know a mechanic of a fight, which might trip me up a little bit, and I might die, but somebody revives me, and then I hopefully know what to do and how to avoid that in the future. So yeah, it's been nice and low stress, just kind of a chill thing for me to play through. I can kind of tune in and out of the story at times, much to Cameron's chagrin, I think, because he'll be like, "Oh, what'd you think of this scene?" I'm like, I honestly just kind of probably skipped through it a little bit. I was not paying too much attention to that part of the story, but the elements of the story that I have tuned in on are, really strong, really good. In my overall Final Fantasy ranking, it's arguably it's probably the best Final Fantasy game that I've played. But I probably still have like nostalgic love for like at least Final Fantasy VI and maybe a couple of the other ones. But there's just so much to this one that's like not really fair to compare the two. But honestly, like one of my favorite elements of it is the just Final Fantasy love that they put into this game, because like, you know, they pull enemies and they pull sequences and they pull bits and pieces from like all sorts of the history of Final Fantasy. There was one of the missions I did late game in Stormblood where we would go into a facility and the 3 bosses of that dungeon were basically all lifted from Final Fantasy VI, from their designs to like even the mechanics of those fights, in a way that just made it a ton of fun. And as you know, that obviously being my favorite was like, you know, I had a smile on my face the whole sequence basically. And so yeah, there's a ton of love put into Final Fantasy XIV that I'm glad I finally bit the bullet and committed to hopping in and doing it. And I'm looking forward to finishing up Shadowbringers and then going into Endwalker and basically playing that content with everybody else who's playing it for the first time. So that'll be a fun kind of way to wrap up a year, especially because it has been a weird year for, especially for like the games that really speak to me, I think. There haven't been a ton. And so the fact that I've been able to kind of have this game as kind of like a steady presence since May, where like, you know, I'll hop off and play something new that comes out, but then I go back to Final Fantasy XIV, and kind of, or even like while I'm playing something else, I might hop in and still do like a daily couple quests to kind of keep things progressing along in Final Fantasy XIV. It's been a nice kind of like consistent presence that I probably wouldn't have been able to find that amount of time for in a busier year.
Yeah, I'm excited for you. I will almost certainly never play Final Fantasy 14.
Yeah. Although you can if you wanted, because it's a free trial and you can play up to level 60.
There you go.
With
Pitch it.
With the award-winning Heavensward expansion pass.
But I love how much you've gotten into this, like, you know, old Final Fantasy like MMO style game all of a sudden, because you just got like hooked on it out of like nowhere. It felt like this summer.
Yeah.
I
mean, so like a lot of people did, I think.
Yeah, so it's been one of my like favorite like stories to check in on Trevor, as well as him just diving through more and more to Final Fantasy here. It was actually funny, you talking about that reminded me a lot of the first game I'm going to talk about. Both in a lot of the same beats you kind of talked about what made that game special, which is I've been playing a lot, in particular the past like week or so. I've like redoubled my efforts just like knock out Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. And it's incredible. Like the game is right. The game is flawed. The game's got issues. It is kind of janky at times in terms of like some tech stuff where like you're just going to kind of fall into mud and kind of walk for a little bit. Your feet never quite are fully on the ground at times, it seems like. But man, when you kind of get into this great combat sequence, when the music swells, when a cutscene starts, like you just forget all of it.
It nails the Star Wars-ness of that game.
Yeah. It is so fun to play in a way that people always talk to me and you in particular about for Souls games, and we just kind of roll our eyes. And it's like it's funny because like playing Star Wars hasn't made me be like, oh man, they were right about all these other sort of games. Like, no, like this is how they all could have been. They could have actually enjoyed these other games more. Like the combat, I just enjoy more. Right? The fact that there are difficulty settings, like the world, like everything about it facilitates making this be a really great experience for the player. Especially if you're anyone who has like any sort of love for Star Wars, right? Like I think just like how you talked about with Final Fantasy, how there is such a obvious love for that series and for its kind of beats and themes and the characters they're kind of making. very clearly that is the case in Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I think there's just something really, really beautiful to the game story. Like first and foremost, right? Like I, as someone who's basically in like the end game of it now, like very much in the end game. And so I've kind of like gotten like most of like the broad strokes of the story filled in now. And this game is a game about like failure and hope. And those are kind of, in some ways, the two kind of pillars of what Star Wars is about. That kind of balancing failure and hope. And in particular, like the original trilogy, obviously hope is such a huge aspect of that because of Luke and being the new hope. And I just think it's such a beautiful game and how they feed into that narrative, how they feed into this idea of what makes Star Wars great, what makes the Jedi good and not so good at times, maybe, of what will make Luke such a great character, right? I think the spoiler alert for a 2-year-old game. I think the Order 66 scene is great. Like, I think it is actually fantastic and is paced so much like an Uncharted game if it was unfolding in the midst of... It was like if Uncharted was paced in like a Last of Us scene kind of thing. Like as chaos and like trauma is occurring around you, such a like fluid moving, forward focused, like action set piece after action set piece after action set piece. I think the way that this game has such a sense of kind of momentum, I think, and just propelling you forward from like area to area. I'm sure that there are people out there who don't enjoy the sequences where you suddenly jump and are like sliding down like a mudslide or an ice slide. They're terribly wrong. Those sequences have never ceased to put a smile on my face. They're so much fun. They're very charming. They're silly and goofy and like all the best gaming ways possible.
I'm curious if this is something that got patched in, because a lot of people's issues with those sequences early on was
like time and shit, I'm sure.
Not the timing, just the hitbox of like grabbing the vines that you needed to grab to like jump was light. And you get abilities throughout the game that makes that easier, but like until you get those abilities, it was a lot of like, I swear I grabbed the thing, but nope, I didn't, and so it took me back to the top, and now I have to slide down the whole thing again or whatever. Like like when the game came out, that was the complaint, was like you do that and those things aren't fun when you feel like you die for a cheap thing that's not like, I died because I got in over my head in combat. I died because of wonky platforming.
Maybe, and that's totally possible. Like that's totally valid, right? Like I've definitely died a couple times in that anyway.
I mean, but it's also like it wasn't like a huge gripe. It was just like when people are like finding the things to kind of like pick on that game about, it was like that was one.
I think for me the issue is I'm so happy to die by falling, right? Like that's just like because you die and you fall and you're back in like 2 seconds. Whereas like if you die in combat, the cuts, I mean, those load times are still, even on PS5, are not friendly. They are not. They're not great. There's definitely a moment of like, all right, like, do I even want to do this again? Sometimes it's just like, it is such a, it can be like an actual like minute of just me waiting to be like loaded back into this thing. That I find much more egregious, especially against certain bosses where, again, like in like a Dark Souls Bloodborne game, it's like, I will say like 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, maybe the boss run is not really that much of a thing. But there are a few in particular where it's like that kind of sucks. Like if you don't beat that boss in one go, and I'm playing on like normal difficulty setting, I'm not doing anything crazy hard or whatever. But there are a few where I'm like, this is kind of a shitty like checkpoint to like have to run this boss. There's one in particular who's like not even like a story boss, it's just like a random like monster that you can like uncover, and that boss run is just annoying as shit. Just because it's a lot of like bounce around shit and platforming, and so like those things are obviously frustrating where it's just like, why can't I just immediately, because clearly you've got the tech. If you can do it when I fall off a cliff, you should be able to do it when I just die by a monster, right?
But it's, because and it is when you fall, you're not dying, you're like, you lose a little bit of health, But
Yeah.
I think that they realized that they needed to be a little forgiving in those kinds of things. So instead, because like in a Soulsborne game, you fall like that, you get the you died, and you go back to go back to a save point, as opposed to those that's like, you know, the more friendly like checkpoint back up to the top of the hill or whatever.
Yeah, so that's like maybe my biggest grief are those kind of checkpoints after you die, those respawns. But otherwise, I really do have almost nothing bad to say about the game, right? Like, I think the way it does combat is so smart. It's so clever. I think it is the game that has most made me really enjoy, like this and Assassin's Creed Odyssey are the games that have most made me really appreciate like a good parry system and a good like block system and like the timing on that, and like really learning what makes each enemy different, upgrading certain skills and certain abilities that I use more or less than others. Like, I think it is such a cool complement of using force abilities and using the saber, a little bit like BioShock and it's like gunplay and tonics. I think this is it really well in figuring out what enemies respond well to each one. And then there are just those moments where it's like, yeah, you've got a crowd of like 10 stormtroopers, and it's like, I'm just going to wreck up shit for a second here real quick, guys. Like, and that feeling I think it gives you of being like, yeah, I am a Jedi, right? Like, especially after you go back to like the Jedi Temple and like actually build your own custom lightsaber. And the music very much like you figure out you can like grab both at the same time and like swing them around, and the music changes, and it's like, here's just a bunch of enemies just to go through for like 5 minutes and just wreck them. And it's such a cool sequence of like, yeah, like I am fine. Like, you know, Cal's like, I've figured out all of my Jedi powers again. I remember them all. It's like, he's like got all of his powers back now. You've like got your own lightsaber now. You've picked the color you want to pick. Just go out and like wreck shop. And it's such a great sequence. And there's just like, because like the open is just like, here are going to be like 30 stormtroopers that just keep getting dropped in. None of them are like anybody who's got like any special abilities. They're all just dummies troopers. Just beat the shit out of these guys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great, right? And then you walk in and there's a room of like 8 like those huge robots, and it's like, all right, this is different. This is going to be actually a little bit challenging, but still it's a ton of fun, right? And I think the game owns those moments because you've leveled yourself up to that point in time and you've progressed through those enemies, and also because Cal himself has undergone this journey now, right? And right before he builds his lightsaber, they have this whole scene with like, you know, Cordova, where he's like, you know, failure is not something to be disappointed in. Failure is like an integral part of the journey, right? Like, you can't succeed, you can't win without failure, right? And then I think how they tie that into Cal's own personal story, but also the larger story of Star Wars and what we know is going to happen in the saga, right? I really loved, right? In the same way where all of the conversations Cal has, I think, that flesh that character out so well are so smart because they're also fleshing out the larger kind of mythology around Star Wars and what makes it special. I think this game, very much like the Clone Wars animated series, was made by people who love the series and understands what makes it so special, what makes it tick. I think you see it reflected in the environments. I think you see that reflected in the characters that are put in front of you. I think you see it reflected in like the tongue-in-cheek humor and like the goofiness of like that ship crew and what it is and what's going on there, right? Like, it is such a well put together Star Wars story.
Yeah, I still remember, I mean, like, going back to like the very beginning of that game when you're on that like junker planet, you're in hiding, all that stuff. I just remember like stopping as you're going through like the tutorial section and just like there's a gonk droid just kind of slowly there or whatever, and kind of just like and like if you have like the subtitles on, I think it even goes gonk, and like like I remember playing that and just being like, they get it. They like they love Star Wars, and this is, you know, this is going to be a good time. And like, I mean, it is a good time. I still had, you know, my issues with the combat and stuff, as I tend to do in those games, because I don't like the parry systems as much. But I love that because the last few times we've talked about it, I've had to kind of like dance around some of the stuff because you hadn't gotten to that like building your own saber part and that part of the journey and stuff. And I like just hearing you talk about it now that you've experienced it. I love that, like, yep, you like it turns and like there is a significant like power shift in that moment, and like you take ownership,
awesome.
and like in reality, like, yes, you have like a new way of fighting in there that's like akin to maybe the God of War moment where like now you've got the Blades of Chaos or whatever. But it was very much like your abilities themselves don't change a ton in the moment before that sequence and the moment after. It's just like now you feel more empowered as as the character, and so you're like, and they do a great job of giving you like cannon fodder that you can like easily destroy because you've been playing the game for 10 hours or whatever at that point. So.
It's great, like the whole stuff with BD1, right? And him finding someone who's like worthy of following up from where like Cordova had been, right? And wiping his memory and like that, like BD1 and Cal's whole relationship is great, and like that whole sequence I think is like such a sweet moment where like you only mentioned one of them, but like you get it, right? And I think that relationship is so earned after 10-15 hours. And then I think for me, the sense of scale of the worlds, right, is like one of the last things I want to talk about, right? Where it is, the Imperial Star Destroyer in the background, but it's actually something that you're going to go in and explore at one point in time, right? It is the, downed AT-AT, which just is massive, right? Like these like pieces of environmental storytelling that actually are things that you'll get to touch on and explore, or if not go directly into, be right next to and get to look up at and be like, Jesus, like this is just enormous, right? And I think these kind of shattered relics of the Clone Wars are such a cool piece of the building of the world, right? Because it is only 5 years after the events of episode 3, right? So it is so fresh and so recent, right? And there aren't a ton of stories set so closely after the Clone Wars in like that original trilogy timeline. And so I find that convention too, where like this is technically like an original trilogy kind of story in a lot of ways in terms of like the world, right? Like it's post Clone Wars, but it's so recent to the Clone Wars, right? It's so fresh that it's like an interest in like in between time space in a way that like Star Wars Rebels isn't at all. And so it's interesting to watch it and play it from that perspective as well, right? And especially with what it does with Order 66, right? Like the trauma that's inflicted on all of these different characters, I think lends something to that day that a lot of the Star Wars medium tries to, but I think doesn't do as effectively almost as it's done here, right? Other than like actual episode 3 where you watch it happen, right? Like, but this is such a personal, like intimate version of that episode, and Cal is such a young boy when it happens. It is immediately clear why the things that the person that he would become is the person who he becomes based off what happens on that day. I think Fallen Order is great. I'm very much in the end game. I've like looked ahead and I have like half a chapter of the game left. So like I'm like there. I basically just have like a boss fight and then a boss fight left, and I've beaten the game. It is excellent. It is great. If I'd played it when it came out in 2019, I haven't finished it yet, obviously, but like I don't know if it would be my game of the year that year. But it definitely would have been right up there. It's a great video game. Yeah,
it was you mentioning the like, there's this Star Destroyer, and I remember playing through and only like going into the Star Destroyer as like an optional thing, like because on one of the planets it's like a whole there's like a little side quest story that kind of like leads you into it, and there's like collectibles and stuff to find, and that's really like if I hadn't been going for like the platinum trophy or whatever on that, like I could have entirely missed that. But it is like a cool little sequence where you like, you're going into like the wrecked ship kind of thing, and there's like a whole like its own little story happens kind of in there that I thought was really cool. So the game definitely plays with scale in cool and interesting ways. Glad you're enjoying it.
That reminded me, I guess, it's like a PS to everything. I really like the Force Echoes and how, again, they kind of help further flesh out that world, like these kind of small character stories of people who've been there like long before you. Some of them are like really simple stuff of like, oh, like that was just a dude who got killed by some like random animal. And then some are really cool and fleshed out, including one on Zepho when you first get there, where you discover like, a village has been moved, and you get like this story of like this like family and like what has been going on with them, and then like the dad like getting his like wife and child to like escape, and him getting captured, and like his story in that world, and then going off world and going to Kashyyyk and like meeting that wife and like being able to like tell her like, oh, like I know what happened to him, here's his story, here's what's going on. I thought it was a really cool like piece of environmental storytelling come to life in a way of like, it'd been like if you'd met like someone who'd known Ish, right, in The Last of Us, and like got to be like, I know what happened, like I have this story kind of thing, let's talk real quick. It's a really cool moment when you get that payoff in Kashyyyk.
I also one of the characters which you obviously would have met by now, the Night Sister, who kind of joins your party. Like she's one of my like I admittedly, like a lot of that game is like foggy to me at this point, and I would need to like kind of revisit it and play it. But like I remember in the moment like loving her as a character, especially because like I think I had only just recently like finally sat down and watched like the Darth Maul arc of the Clone Wars, where the Night Sisters are very prominent, and she's obviously like
very huge,
alluding to and talking to a lot of elements of that story. So like, other than that, I was just like, she's just a badass character, and I'm glad she's on my side. So very cool.
Yeah, it is great. Trevor, what else have you been playing?
I mean, so we don't have to spend a ton of time on this one, but another one that I've been just kind of like has been a steady presence really all year is Fortnite. I got back into Fortnite end of last year when they did the bounty hunter season that was like the Mandalorian and the Child. I was like, I was all in on Mandalorian at that time, and so I was like, I'll hop back into this, and I'll pick up the battle pass and play through and grind out to level 100, and I've just kind of stuck with it. So that's like that was chapter 2 season 5, and right now we're in chapter 2 season 8, and chapter 5, 6, 7, and now 8. I've gotten up over level 100 every time. Literally right before we sat down to record, like I messaged you, I was like, are you ready? I was just finishing something up. That thing I was finishing up was getting a victory royale in Fortnite.
There you go, absolutely.
Right before we played. I'm like level 142 or something in the current season. I got up to level 200 in a couple of them. Basically, like to like anybody that like plays Fortnite might know this, but like the battle pass only goes up to like level 100. That's when you unlock like the last of like the geared or whatever the cosmetic-y things. But then they give you to keep you playing, you get like prestigious kind of like you'll get like a silver version of some of those characters in the like early hundreds, and then like by the time you get to like level 200 you'll have gotten like everything, and that's going to be like the silver, the gold, the whatever kind of versions of those things. And like at least last season I got up to level 200, so I got like everything you could unlock in that season, and I'm almost certainly going to get everything I can unlock in this season too.
Absolutely.
It's really just like I think in all of that time I haven't hopped in and played with like friends or anything, because like I have had friends that have been like hopping in, like Joey Noel's hopped in, and Lauren Wilson, aka Beasley, they've hopped in and they've been squatting up, and like they were playing with Kevin Coelho and even Greg from Kind of Funny for a while there, and I've just been playing it solo, and like it's I'll hop in, I'll play like a match or two, or sometimes more, kind of a day, and it's just kind of like it's a nice. I'm gonna take a 15-minute break from work, and I'm gonna sit down. I'm gonna play a match, and then I'm gonna go back to my computer and sit down and play some of that. So like that's been a nice kind of just thing to do, or just kind of I'm not in the mood for like a full on like let me sit down and play a game, so I'm just gonna between now and dinner or something like that, I'm gonna sit down and play a couple matches, knock that out, and then I'll hop in and play like the thing I'm interested in really diving in and spending some time with. So it's just been kind of a nice like in between game, in the same way that I think like you really put a lot of time into like Warzone. It's just it scratches that itch, and the fact that I've been able to get a handful of victory royales like continues to surprise me. But it's always a nice treat when I do.
Yeah. Love that. Okay, Fortnite. My second game that I've been playing is Alan Wake Remastered. I don't know if I've given an update on the pod itself. Trevor's heard a lot of my thoughts, but now all of you get to hear them. Alan Wake is a weird game. And I know what you're saying, Logan. That's what it's known for being. And I'm out to here to tell you, no, Alan Wake is a weird game, guys. It is David Lynch, Twin Peaks, Deadly Premonitions. Like, let's take it up to 11 weird. Like, it like all of the non sequiturs, all of the kind of random cuts and picks up, right? Like, I told Trevor off air a couple weeks ago, the only game that I can really even compare it to is Virginia in terms of kind of the jarring cuts into the past, into the present, and like picking up notes that reference things you're gonna do in the future, but like in their own like oblique ways, and you kind of do them and are like, oh wait, was this about this? Like there was a very surreal sequence at the end of the first episode where like I began to realize that the notes I was reading, some of them anyway, were like things that were gonna happen in the future, and then like doing them, and I was like, oh shit, this is really strange.
Quantum Break had a few, like I remember feeling that a little bit in Quantum Break, which unsurprisingly, given that it was like their follow-up to Alan Wake. But yeah, it's
a weird sensation.
Yeah,
like especially like just like reading a note and being like, huh, okay, and then like 5 minutes later, like walking into the thing and like watching it happen and being like, oh shit, like, and then like basically like once it started to happen at the end of the first episode, that happened real quick. Like it was like every note was like, this is gonna happen in 3 minutes, and it was such a strange gameplay sequence to play. Hopping into like episode 2 and like everything involved there, and like the new characters it brought in, and then shifting forward from there, like to the episodes that follow up, like it is a weird gaming experience where like the further into the story you get, the more kind of off kilter you still feel, right? Like it still feels like I have no sort of like grounding in terms of like what is happening and where we're going. The combat is still very wonky and almost wholly unnecessary. There are a few standout sequences of combat, using standout I guess pretty loosely, but there are a few sequences I'm like, all right, cool, that was great. It is definitely a 2008 video game though, and like the fact that they felt like they had to have so much combat in it, right? Like they didn't feel like they were free in maybe the vein of like a Last of Us or even just a straight up walking sim to kind of really peel back the amount of combat in that game. And I think that is routinely the game's biggest weakness, is the unnecessary combat, especially because it's not particularly great, or really that engaging and interesting. One thing that the combat does well, really the only thing the combat does well, I guess if I'm gonna be honest, is how frantic and frazzled it can make you as the player feel, because you have to do a lot of shit. You have a lot of just moving parts anytime you get into a combat situation. And so that is kind of effective when it feels like it's done deliberately. And then other times when it just feels like, oh, this just isn't maybe made the best as it could have been. It's a different feeling. But yeah, I mean, the game is weird, and I know that that's like a really trite thing to say about it, maybe, but like, it is so much of what the experience is like, right? It is strange, it is surreal, it is unnerving, it is very camp, it is super dramatic, it is soap opera esque, and it does all of this with a really intriguing kind of central idea and premise and mystery, and the way that it's kind of slowly peels back the layers of that mystery to kind of not really help you get a better of what's going on, but give you more things to think about, I think is really, really unique. It is such a weird mixture of video games. It is Shadow of the Colossus meets like Virginia, meets like What Remains of Edith Finch, meets very obviously Deadly Premonitions, and I can't in good conscience say it pulls it off most of the time, but it pulls it off some of the times, and when it does, it's really, really effective. I would be very curious to see what a sequel to this game would be. And in some ways we've gotten sequels to this game just in that larger universe, but like a direct Alan Wake sequel, or even like a straight up reboot of this game, and like using like what we can do in 2021, I'd be really, really curious about. But part of me loves the idea that this is the kind of video game that doesn't really exist any longer. This mid-tier 7.5 video game that they just don't really let happen that often anymore. And it's the kind of video game or kind of movie that I have a soft spot in my heart for. These things that are just good, and they're weird, and they're flawed, and that is Alan Wake. And despite the many issues I have with it, I'm definitely still glad that I am playing through it and experiencing Alan Wake on my own, finally. It is a very strange, unique experience.
Remind me, have you played Control?
Nope. I have it there for free on PS Plus. Only $10.99 a month.
I mean, based on kind of how you've described what you like about Alan Wake, I think Control would be probably a much better fit for you to hop into.
I'm sure.
Because it definitely has.
They've just been able to learn too. Yeah.
Yeah, it is even more so than Quantum Break. It is really all in on the on that David Lynch aspect of it, and you're really getting messed up with time at times. And the combat in there feels a lot better. It feels much more like a good third person shooter. And in particular, obviously, there is a specific element of like the one of the DLC expansions of Control is basically like revisiting Alan Wake's story, and
yeah,
and so I even Googled here. I'm like, is that technically like a sequel? Like we kind of see these days of like, oh, it's kind of like a backdoor. Here's how we're gonna keep telling that story, but it's in a different game or something like that. And while I've played Control a couple times, I've just never felt compelled to really hop into the Alan Wake DLC of Control.
I mean, it is a horror. It is like a survival horror game,
right? Yeah. It's the
more you dive into it, yeah. I mean,
yeah. So it's probably not my cup of tea, but I think I think especially if you can like hop in and just enjoy Control for what it is, I think it'd be something that like I'd be really curious your thoughts on the Alan Wake aspect of the Control DLC kind of stuff. And then just also Control in general, I think would be I think it is a very cerebral kind of game. And it'd be fascinating to sit down and talk to you about, if you ever do. And I know, like, I think Frank has played it too a couple times. And maybe Cameron as well. So yeah,
I think Frank really likes Control, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm definitely curious. Control obviously has got so much buzz when it came out. To see what I mean, I played it at some PAX.
It was notoriously terrible at PAX.
Yeah, it was a weird demo.
It was a weird demo. It was buggy as all hell. Had significant performance issues, and admittedly,
it was a strange demo.
It didn't at launch. The PS4, Xbox One generation of that game didn't run great, but it runs way smoother now on the current gen stuff. So, yeah, pick up the PS5 version of that and have a good time.
Very well. Trevor, what is your next /or last game you've been playing recently? I don't know how many you have.
So I didn't know how far back we wanted to go because like realistically right now I'm only playing. I'm bouncing back between Final Fantasy XIV and Fortnite, but
give me one more then. Yeah.
But yeah, the one more that I hopped into recently in anticipation for a game I'm going to hop into like in a week is I hopped into Forza Horizon 4. Back when the like the preview footage or preview kind of like coverage of Forza 5 came out, I was like, you know what, I want to hop back into Forza and get that itch, and so I hopped in to my old Forza Horizon 4, kind of loaded that up. I super got into that game when the Lego DLC for Forza Horizon 4 came out. And like basically like I hopped in, played the game a little bit on Game Pass, and was like, oh, if I want to like play the Lego stuff, I need to pay for the Lego expansion. All right, sure, I'll do that. And by like that weekend's end, I ended up like putting, $40 into like the other expansion, as well as like a whole bunch of like the cars or whatever, the car packs, and just had a great time with it. And like booting this version or booting Forza Horizon 4 back up, I had left off on the other expansion, which is basically like Fortune Island or whatever, where you're going around and you're solving riddles, and like each riddle you solve basically like gives you a screenshot, and you have to go find that treasure chest in that screenshot on the map. It gives you like here's the general area, and then you go find it and you plow through it and you get 1,000 or 1,000,000 credits or whatever to spend on other cars and stuff. And I had left off in like level 2 of that expansion, and I basically hopped in, was like, all right, I'm just gonna play this. I played this in like my week between jobs, so I just had a ton of time to just sit down and spend some time with it. And I ended up like going all the way through level 10, maxing out and doing some of the big like the final races in that expansion, and then just finally like hop back over into like the Britain area and just had a great time with that. And so in doing all of that, I was like, I'm curious, like they obviously haven't announced what the expansions and stuff are going to be for Forza Horizon 5, but I looked into it and I was like, you know what, if I just drop the money, like I'm gonna get to play the game on Game Pass, but I can also buy like the premium pass or whatever, which will get me the 2 expansions when they come out. It'll get me, a car pack, and it'll get me like early access to the game. And I was like, yeah, I'll do that. So I bought that, which is less than like if I just bought the game, the base game generally. And so I've got that ready to go. And so it means I'll get to play Forza Horizon 5 a little bit early when it, goes live, the early access version of it, and just have some fun driving around Mexico. So got that all I even have it like installed, because it's they basically have the pre-install ready to go now on my Xbox Series X. And so as soon as that like goes live, I'm gonna have a weekend or just enjoy the crap out of that for a little while, which is weird for me because I'm not a car guy and I'm not a racing game guy.
Embrace it.
But Forza Horizon does a fun job where you're basically like everything you're doing in those games. I went to Portillo's with my family for a family lunch last weekend, maybe 2 weekends ago, and like went off on a tangent just telling my mom and my aunt about how I got sucked into Forza Horizon 4 again, and was like telling them like, oh yeah, like it's really cool because like if you plow through a fence, you gain experience for that, and you're leveling up, and you're kind of always getting something for whatever you're doing in that, and you can hop in and you're playing races, you're driving against your Drivatar friends or whatever, and yeah, it was just a fun experience, and I like just the amount of like nerdity that I was diving into and telling them, just like because they were enjoying like the excitement on my face as I told them about it. So yeah, that was another one I hopped into recently, and I'm very excited for Forza Horizon 4 or Forza Horizon 5 here in about a week's time, I think.
Very exciting. Yeah. Racing games are good, actually. Go play Jack Dex Combat Racing. Jack X. Yeah, the last thing I'm playing, I couldn't remember. I had like 4 things. I couldn't remember one of the games, so it gets off scot-free. But the other thing I did want to give a shout out to, because just like you in Final Fantasy, that you kind of crept back into this thing, or you in Fortnite, maybe more accurately.
It was weird. Like both of them were actually like, I got into both of them around the same time back in like 2018, and then fell off of both of them. And then, yeah, the fact that both of them have like crept back into my life this year because it's a lighter year and because I was looking for things to do. And yeah, like they're both weirdly intertwined for me of like,
yeah,
like my summer of Fortnite and Final Fantasy XIV Online.
For me, it is not a thing I've played since, but just 2 weekends ago, when I had like just was looking for like something to do, and I didn't necessarily, and I think I was playing Fallen Order and also Alan Wake, but I was like, I want to just do something else, just like as a palate cleanse. I dove back into Super Meat Boy, and playing like the original Super Meat Boy was such a good reminder of like, man, Super Meat Boy Forever is such a disappointment. Like I feel like I came in at Game of the Year last year, and like I just started playing it, and I was like, yeah, it could be better. Like it was in my top 10. I think I had it like at 10 or 9. I didn't have it super high, but it's like, yeah, it could get better. I'm excited to see what it does. And then I think I've just soured on it more and more throughout the year. Like man, like it is such a different game playing the original Super Meat Boy. And also like it is so cool to see how much it just like comes back, like riding a bike, right? Like immediately knowing like the jumps and spots and like areas to kind of go and way to do it. But Super Meat Boy is a game all about trial and error, obviously, but also about like thinking through each step. And you just don't get that ability in Super Meat Boy Forever. Like the game just doesn't afford you that opportunity really, due to the nature of what it is. And that's fine. I mean, they're obviously, you know, that kind of a runner type game, all about momentum, has its time and place and can be enjoyable. And Super Meat Boy Forever is, you know, enjoyable enough, but it is such a tonal difference from what Super Meat Boy, I think, at its heart is kind of about. And man, just like the tongue-in-cheek nature of that game, the humor behind it, how well crafted though like each individual level is, especially in the early worlds before they become like really like piss and vinegar about the levels. Like those first 2 worlds in particular are just like flawlessly designed, where they're challenging, or some, I mean, the first world's pretty easy, but like challenging but also rewarding and want you to keep going forward without wanting to like break your controller, right? Like I think they strike a really good balance, and the game becomes like pretty famously brutally hard at a certain point, but it feels earned because it's given you the ability to know how to do a lot of the things, versus I feel like a lot of games you see that do that kind of style of like, it's impossibly hard, doesn't earn it because it just gets hard so quickly, or just starts off hard and expects you to already be great at video games. And like playing through like the first like world and a half again a couple weeks ago, I was reminded of how well done the like curve of difficulty is in Super Meat Boy. And how they, again, kind of like we touched on in Star Wars Fallen Order, how when you get to those moments where it's like, this is like, I don't even know how that's possible to do, and then you do it, it feels so great because you've earned those moments based off what has come beforehand. Yeah, I mean, Super Meat Boy Forever is, unfortunately, is what it is, but the original Super Meat Boy is just such a classic for a reason. And I think from sound design to the humor of it to each individual level and what makes it unique and kind of figuring out the like weird quirk about it, it is a fantastic video game, and yeah, it is one of my favorites for a very good reason.
I just looked up my trophy list on Super Meat Boy. I was like, how did I do on Super Meat Boy? I have 1 trophy from that game, and it was
nice.
You found
that trophy list.
Oh, the trophy list is absolute horseshit,
insane.
But the 1 trophy I got was you found a warp zone. Now pay me for the door repair. It was nostalgia. That was the only trophy I got, and I think I cleared the first world. Because I think that one ends with like
I think you can do that. Yeah,
like there's a machine with like a saw or something that's kind of chasing you, and it's the first time you deal with one of those kinds of levels. Yeah, I made it through that one after many fails.
The first world I think is like some of the later levels in that first world get a little tricky. But like the first world's pretty doable, I think, on the whole. Like I really do think that it's a pretty great first world to kind of do in. Um, yeah, that trophy list though,
Yeah.
I will say, is unfathomably
Yeah.
shit.
Because
It's a shit list.
like a whole bunch of the trophies are beat this entire world without dying.
It's incredible. Like
Yeah.
I might have like the first world. I think I spent like an afternoon one day just like trying to get like that trophy for like the first world, like not die a single time, because the first world is like the only one that like that makes sense to me on. Because like part of the thing about Super Meat Boy is that like it's just trial and error, but also like it's just like shit. It's just pure luck at times. Honestly, like the timing has to just go in your favor so well on some of those later levels. Like it is just luck. And so like I look at some of those trophies where it's like, yeah, beat the entire game without dying once, and then like do it again on like Dark World mode, and it's like I don't even know how it's possible. Like I literally don't even know how that's possible, because like that is like so much luck baked into that, right? Like to me, it's not like when people like speed run the Mario games, or like they're like, you know, cheats and cracks into that game and all this kind of shit you can do, and also that game just isn't as hard. Right, whereas like Super Meat Boy, to not die once all the way through on the regular game is you have to have so much time and go in your favor, because there's like certain times where like you just start off ready to die if you don't immediately do something, right? And it's just like you have to know this all ahead of time, and then to let alone do it again on Dark World, where like it just takes in your like it just comes at you immediately. Is like I really don't know how that some of those trophies are possible. Like it like that is one trophy list where I'm like, that just seems like nonsense.
I mean, I looked
yeah.
you up. Congratulations, you do have the Beat the Forest Light World Without Dying trophy, December 7th,
Nice.
2017.
It's a bitch of that one. It really just was me just taking an afternoon and being like, I'm just gonna play this game over an afternoon.
Yeah. Have you not beaten Super Meat Boy though?
Nope.
No. Okay.
Technically not,
because you don't have the trophy for you beat the game. So I was like,
yeah.
Given how much Logan talks about this, I definitely would have thought you would have beaten the game.
Yeah, because I beat the 5 worlds, and then it does like extra shit. And basically, when I beat the 5th, because the game makes you think there are 5 worlds. And when I beat that 5th world, and there was like, there's more, I was like,
fuck you.
Yeah, because like even beating the 5 worlds took me like a year to do, right? And so when I got to the moment and beat it, and it was like, oh, it's actually more, I was like, I need a break. And so then like I came back like another year after that, and like did the like next thing, and then it's like there's more, and I was like, fuck this.
Yeah.
And that's me when I was like, I could like really put the time and effort in doing this, but also like for what? Like it's one of those things for me where it's like no. Like, I just have no desire. And, like, when I played it again a couple weeks ago, I, like, went back into some of those, like, later levels. And was like, yeah, like, 2 of these, like final 4 are, like, totally fair and doable. One is, like, kind of a kick in the balls. And one is just a piss take where I'm like, this is just bullshit. And, like, and it's the last one, of course. And I'm like, I just don't have the desire to do this anymore.
Yeah. That is your rarest trophy, though.
I'm sure.
Per PSN profiles.
Yeah. I have to update my trophies, but yeah, I'm sure. It is such a that was a great day. Yeah, Super Meat Boy is my last game that I've been playing recently. Otherwise, that's the show. We made it. Trevor, do you have any shout outs you want to shout out on this here episode?
I do not. Nothing jumps out at me. Nothing comes. Oh, actually, no. Give a shout out to our friend Barrett Courtney over at Kinda Funny, who all month long has been doing video essays on
Arkham.
the Arkham files.
Yeah.
As of this episode, his first 3 are out on Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, and Arkham Origins, and then the finale, Arkham Knight, will go out Halloween Day. But yeah, go check those out, where he kind of makes the case for why each of those games is really great. Even like his argument for Arkham Origins is like, they were screwed by what they were stuck with, but they tell a great Batman origin story. So yeah, go check out his series.
Yeah, I will concur. Barrett is very good, and the series is very good, and the Arkham games are very good. All of it's very good, actually. Now that I think about it, yeah, that's a great shout out. I didn't really have a shout out, but I'll shout out ScreenRant and its ranking of James Bond movies because it's very good mostly, and I agree with it. Otherwise, that's a show. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, you can go support us over at patreon.com/thatnerdy site, like all of our wonderful patrons and supporters have. Their support means the world to us and helps keep the lights on and make shows like this and like that D Plus show happen. Again, that is patreon.com/thatnerdy site. You can also go like, subscribe, share with your friends on podcast services around the globe. Rate and review us on iTunes. Give us 5 stars. Tell us what you like about us. Leave a nice little review for us. We will check them every 3 months. Otherwise, you can go over to youtube.com/thatnerdysite and like and subscribe to that YouTube channel and the videos there. Just have them playing in the background while you do your math homework. Otherwise, you can go to thatnerdysite.com, check out the website there. All of the podcasts go live there. All the written reviews, features, all the other stuff that we do every now and again also happen on the website. Otherwise, you can go find Trevor Starkey at Trevor J. Starkey on the internet. Trevor, anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I will plug that D Plus show. We're still doing our Halloween month here of Halloween themed content. We had a slight shuffling of our order of stuff, but fortunately we had already recorded this one. So this last week's episode was Halloween Town 2, Calabar's Revenge, which
it's a good movie.
No, it's not. Despite what Logan says in there. But I was looking at that like it's performing, well by our standards on video views.
Hell
at
yeah,
least. But
absolutely.
Part of me wonders if it's what we usually get in these kinds of cases where people are like YouTube, like Googling YouTube or whatever, trying to find the movie, and then they see our podcast about it and like see that it's not the movie and bounce off after like 10 seconds.
Hey, you know what? Suckers. I'll take the view either any day. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. That was a good episode with me, you, and Trevor. Me, you, and Frank. Yeah, I really enjoyed that, even if it was kind of maybe a disappointment. Who can say? You can go find me at Lefty Logie or Lefty Logie on the internet, LOGGY. I will echo Trevor's shout out for Halloween Town 2 and the entire Halloween slate of that D Plus show we've done so far this month.
This week's episode should be a fun one because it'll be our originally scheduled thing. And actually, I kind of like this. I like it falling here better because it makes future installments of this one more appropriate. But it'll be our Treehouse of Horror episode where we dive into the first 3 Treehouse of Horror Simpsons episodes. Should be a fun one.
I'm very excited for it. I love the first 4 episodes of Simpsons. They are some of my favorite episodes of TV, actually. And I like starting here kind of with the early ones, like Trevor said, in a Slack chat, before a lot of the big iconic moments kind of really start happening. But you still get some early seeds of what makes Treehouse of Horror so special and unique. So that's going to be exciting. I'm going to give a shout out to Trevor's episode of Trevor Plays Psychonauts 2. I knew very little about Psychonauts 2. I don't know how much more I learned from Psychonauts 2 from watching the video, but it's a good video. And it's a nice meaty, like 40-minute long Let's Play. Go check it out. I think I enjoy when Trevor gets to play games for an extended period of time in a Let's Play, because he just, like, Trevor will go through a period where he, like, kind of references the camera and then just, like, I'm just talking to myself now. And it's always a great, like, through the looking glass moment, especially when he gets angry while doing it, which he didn't really get on Psychonauts 2, but there are some out there that he does. And yeah, I encourage everyone to go check out that episode of Trevor Plays, which went live, Time to Flat Circle, today, as of recording.
Yep.
Yeah,
that was the next one. If we'd kept going, that was one of the next ones on my list that I would have brought up was Psychonauts 2, because as I kind of tweeted out today when I promoted that episode, I recorded that Let's Play. It's the first level of the game. It's kind of the tutorial level. And then within 48 hours, I had done everything else in that game and gotten the 1,000-point gamer score.
It's like a Life is Strange all over again.
Yeah, and I was very tempted I'm still tempted to. And I probably will at some point pick that game up on sale on PlayStation just to go through it all over again and get the platinum trophy on it. But Psychonauts 2, real good game.
Yeah. Go check it out. Go check it.
Despite having not played the first one.
Yeah, who needs it? So I encourage everyone to go check that out. Go check out all the content over there at YouTube, and all the exciting video stuff we're doing and more to come. Otherwise, you can go check out That Nerdy Site. There's one less otherwise for you at thatnerdysite.com. And check out all of the fun stuff we have on the Twitter channel and the 2 posts I believe we have on our Instagram account. For myself, for Trevor, and for all of us here at That Nerdy Site, play your games and be good to each other.